I walked into the plaza with $97,000 in jewelry to celebrate my parents' golden anniversary, only for security to block my path. My father, the man whose $85,000 heart surgery I just bankrolled, didn't even flinch as he gave the order, "Get this beggar out of my sight." The cold Manhattan air bit through my charcoal overcoat as I stepped out of my BMW 7 Series, the engine still humming with a quiet, expensive purr. I stood before the iconic entrance of the Plaza Hotel where the amber glow of the chandeliers spilled onto the sidewalk like liquid gold. This was the night of my parents' golden wedding anniversary. 50 years of marriage, a milestone that deserved nothing less than the absolute best. In my hands, I carried two glossy, ribbon-wrapped boxes that felt heavier than their physical weight. One contained a platinum Rolex day-date, a $52,000 masterpiece for my father Arthur. The other held a $45,000 Cartier diamond bracelet for my mother Eleanor. I had spent months sourcing these pieces, wanting to prove that their son had finally become the man they always hoped he would be. I walked toward the revolving doors with the kind of confidence that only comes from success and a deep sense of duty. For the last 5 years, I had been the silent architect of their comfort. I had paid for the renovations on their house, their medical insurance, and their spontaneous vacations. I walked into the lobby where the scent of expensive lilies and polished marble filled the air. I approached the reception desk, smiling at the hostess who was dressed in elegant black silk. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady and warm. "I am Julian Maddox. I am here for the anniversary celebration in the grand ballroom." The hostess tapped at her tablet, her smile remaining professional but her eyes growing puzzled. She scrolled through the list once, then twice. She looked up at me with a small apologetic frown. "I am sorry, sir, but I do not see a Julian Maddox on the guest list." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "There must be a mistake. I am the son of the guests of honor, Arthur and Eleanor Maddox. I am the one who settled the deposit for the ballroom. Please check again." Her eyes flickered to the side, signaling someone behind me. A man in a sharp tuxedo, the floor manager, appeared within seconds. He did not look at me with respect. He looked at me as if I were a stain on the carpet. Behind him stood two uniformed security guards, their hands clasped firmly behind their backs. "Is there a problem?" the manager asked, his voice low and cold. "There is a misunderstanding," I explained, still holding the gift boxes. "I am Julian. I am part of the family." The manager leaned in, his expression hardening into something truly ugly. "We have received very specific instructions from the hosts themselves. They were quite clear. If you showed up, we were told to deny you entry. In fact, Mr. Maddox used a very specific word to describe you." He paused, a cruel glint in his eyes. "He told us to get this beggar out of his sight." The word beggar hit me with the force of a physical blow. I stood frozen as the weight of the $97,000 worth of jewelry in my hands suddenly felt like lead. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I forced my voice to remain calm, even though my world was fracturing. "My parents would not say that. You have been misinformed." The manager shook his head slowly. "They confirmed it multiple times tonight. You are not welcome here, sir. Now please leave before we are forced to escort you out in front of the other guests." One of the guards placed a firm hand on my shoulder. It was a calculated, dismissive gesture. They guided me back toward the revolving doors, and for a moment I stopped. I turned my head to look through the massive glass wall that separated the lobby from the ballroom. The sight was devastating. The room was a sea of emerald silk and navy tuxedos. I saw my father Arthur standing on the podium. He was raising a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon champagne, laughing at a joke made by my brother Ethan. My mother Eleanor sat beside him, her neck draped in pearls, looking radiant under the light of the chandeliers. Further down the table, my niece Piper was taking selfies, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone dot. Further down the table, my niece Piper was taking selfies, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. She smiled sweetly, but her eyes flicked toward the gifts in my hands, with a calculation that felt almost rehearsed. They were surrounded by luxury that I had bankrolled. I had paid the $120,000 bill for this entire evening. The champagne they were drinking, the Italian truffles they were eating, the five-piece swing band playing in the corner, every single cent had come from my account. And yet, not one of them looked toward the door. Not one of them was looking for me. They had erased me from the guest list of my own life. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. My fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. It was the receipt from last month, a payment of $85,000 for my father's emergency heart surgery and the subsequent private recovery suite. I had paid it without a second thought because family comes first. Now, that same man was calling me a beggar while he celebrated on my dime. I stood there for a long beat, watching the shadow of my own reflection on the glass. The pain in my chest, which had been a sharp hot bloom of betrayal, began to cool. It hardened into a cold, sharp edge of resolve. I realized then that they did not love the son. They loved the ghost who signed the checks. I turned away from the glass. I did not say a word to the security guards. I walked out of the hotel and into the rain that had begun to fall over Central Park South. The mist clung to my coat, but I did not feel the cold anymore. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking application. With a few deliberate taps, I began the process of freezing every secondary credit card and canceling every recurring transfer linked to their names. I looked back at the glowing windows of the grand ballroom one last time. "The party is over," I whispered to the rain. I stepped into my car and drove away, leaving the lights of the plaza behind me. The war had begun, and for the first time in my life, I was not going to be the one who lost. The flight back to Austin was a blur of dark clouds and silent, simmering fury. By the time I reached my penthouse, the city lights below were flickering like dying embers in the Texas night. I did not go to bed. I did not even take off my coat. I went straight to my home office where Sloan Vance was already waiting for me. Sloan was not just a financial consultant. She was a forensic shark. She sat at my mahogany desk, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of 3 different monitors. She did not ask how the anniversary party went. She saw my face, saw the rain-drenched shoulders of my coat, and simply turned her screen toward me. "Are you ready to see the soul of your family, Julian?" she asked, her voice as sharp as a scalpel. "Because data does not have a heart, and it certainly does not tell lies." I sat down and stared at the master ledger we had been building for weeks. The number at the bottom of the spreadsheet was highlighted in a violent shade of red, $842,000. Over the last 5 years, I had poured nearly $1 million into the Maddox family coffers. I had viewed it as a duty, a tax I paid for the privilege of being a good son. But as Sloan began to overlay my bank transfers with their social media activity and public records, a sickening pattern began to emerge. We called it the choreography of crisis. "Look at June of last year," Sloan said, tapping a key. "Your mother, Eleanor, called you on a Tuesday. She was sobbing, telling you that the property taxes on the family home were delinquent, and they were at risk of a tax lien. You wired her $35,000 that same afternoon. She then pulled up a saved screenshot from an archived travel blog. 48 hours later, your father and mother were photographed in a first-class lounge at JFK heading to the Amalfi Coast for a surprise luxury retreat. The $35,000 did not go to the government, Julian. It went to a 5-star hotel in Positano." My stomach turned, but Sloan was just getting started. She moved to the section labeled Education. "You sent $18,000 to your niece Piper for what she claimed was a tuition shortfall for her senior year. She told you she would be kicked out of her classes if you did not help." Sloan opened Instagram on the second monitor. There was a photo of Piper looking radiant in a sun-drenched cafe. Beside her on the chair sat an orange box that every woman in Manhattan would recognize. It was a Hermes Birkin bag, the leather supple, and the hardware gleaming. The caption read, "Small rewards for big efforts, self-made luxury life." "The tuition was never unpaid," Sloan said coldly. "The university records show her scholarships covered everything. You did not pay for her education, you paid for her accessories. But the final blow was the largest one. 2 years ago, I had wired $250,000, $250,000 to my father. He had told me with a shaking voice that a business investment had turned sour and he was being sued. He said the family legacy was on the line. Sloan pulled up the county property records for Lake Tahoe. There was no lawsuit, Julian. There was no sour investment. Your father used that $250,000 as a cash down payment for a lakefront estate. The house is not in the family name. It is held in a private trust that excludes you entirely. They did not want to save a legacy. They wanted to build a sanctuary where you were not invited. I looked at the whiteboard across the room where I had pinned the photographs of my mother and me from years ago. I realized then that every tear she had shed on the phone was a rehearsed performance. Every "I love you, honey" was a transaction. I was not her son. I was an insurance policy. I was the family ATM, and the machine was finally out of order. "Sloan," I said, my voice sounding like gravel, "do it." "Are you sure?" she asked, her finger hovering over the mouse. Once I execute these commands, their lifestyle collapses in real time. The secondary cards, the car leases, the insurance premiums, it all stops. "Cancel everything," I replied. "I want every cent clawed back. I want the automatic transfers deleted. I want the Maddox family to wake up in the world they actually earned, not the one I bought for them." Sloan clicked the mouse with a final satisfying snap. On the screen's row after row of active status bars turned to a flat, dead, terminated. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the Austin skyline. The silence in the room was heavy, almost holy. For the first time in a decade, I felt light. I was no longer carrying the weight of 4 ungrateful people on my back. Then the silence was shattered. My phone resting on the mahogany desk began to vibrate. The screen lit up Mom. It stopped for a second, then vibrated again. Then a text message flashed across the screen, followed by another. The haptic motor was buzzing so fast it sounded like a trapped hornet. I walked over and picked up the device. 42 missed calls. 12 voice messages. A dozen texts ranging from, "Julian, there is a mistake with the card at the hotel," to, "How dare you do this to us on our anniversary?" I did not answer. I did not even feel angry anymore. I simply turned the phone face down on the desk and walked toward my kitchen to make a cup of black espresso. The party was truly over now, and I was the only one who knew how to survive in the dark. The sunrise over Austin was a cold, clinical gray, offering no warmth to the penthouse that had become my war room. I sat with a cup of black espresso that had long since gone cold, watching the silent city move below. The peace did not last. My phone, which I'd ignored for hours, finally screamed with a call that I could not overlook. It was Arthur. I picked up the phone but did not say a word. I wanted to hear the sound of the man who had called me a beggar only hours before. "Julian," my father's baritone voice boomed, stripped of any fatherly affection. It was the voice he used when a business deal was failing. "I hope you are satisfied. Your mother is in hysterics, and the hotel has threatened to hold our luggage because the primary card was declined this morning. Are you really going to try and kill your own parents because of a little bruised pride? Is your ego worth more than the lives of the people who raised you?" "My ego," I replied, my voice a flat, dangerous calm. "I paid for the heart that is beating in your chest right now. Arthur, I paid for the roof over your head and the champagne you used to toast my exclusion. You did not just exclude me from a party. You tried to erase my existence while living on my labor. You are an ungrateful child," he spat. "We gave you life. You owe us everything. If you do not restore the accounts by noon, you will find out exactly how much power I still have in this town. Do not think your money makes you untouchable." He hung up before I could respond. The entitlement was a sickness, a parasite that had grown so large it now believed it owned the host. A few minutes later, the elevator chimed. Brooks Reed stepped out, his face tight with anxiety. He was my oldest friend, The one man who still had a foot in both worlds. He looked like he had not slept in days. "Julian, it is worse than you think," Brooks said, dropping a thick manila envelope on the table. "They are not just angry. They are going on the offensive. Arthur and Eleanor have already contacted a freelance investigative reporter. They are feeding him a story that you built your firm through illegal tax shelters, and that you have been financially abusing your elderly parents to keep them under your thumb. They want to destroy your reputation before you can expose their fraud." I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of emails sent from my mother's private account to a journalist known for Eat the Rich exposés. They were painting me as a villainous tycoon who had abandoned his family in their darkest hour. "They are playing for keeps, Brooks," I whispered. "There is something else," Brooks said, leaning in. "I managed to get access to the hotel's internal security logs through a contact. You thought your parents removed you from the guest list, right?" He slid a tablet across the desk. It showed the digital audit trail of the event planning software used by the plaza. The name Julian Maddox had been deleted 48 hours before the event. But the user ID associated with the deletion did not belong to Arthur or Eleanor. It belonged to Piper, my niece, the 22-year-old innocent student whose tuition I'd paid, the girl who sent me heart emojis every morning. "Why?" I asked, though the answer was already forming in my mind. "She has been whispering in their ears for months, Julian," Brooks explained. "She convinced Arthur that you were planning to put them in a state-run nursing home to seize the Lake Tahoe property. She told them that if you were at the party, you would make it all about yourself. She is clearing the field. With you out of the picture, she becomes the sole beneficiary of the family trust and the Tahoe estate. She is not a victim of their greed. She is the one directing it." The betrayal felt like a new kind of cold. Piper was the one I had trusted most, the one I thought had remained untainted by my father's narcissism. Instead, she was the most dangerous of them all. She was a predator in a designer sundress. I looked at the whiteboard, at the red lines connecting the lies to the money. The choreography of Crisis had a new lead dancer. "They think they're playing a game of reputation," I said to Brooks. "They think I will fold because I am afraid of a headline. They have forgotten one very important thing about how I built my company." I sat down at my computer. Over the years, because I was the one who set up their devices, their home networks, and their cloud backups, I had maintained the administrative keys to the family's digital life. I had never used them. I had respected their privacy because I believed we were a family. That belief was dead. I opened the family group chat, the one where they had spent years sending me emergency requests and fake medical updates. My fingers moved across the screen with surgical precision. I typed a single message and hit send. I have seen the emails to the reporter. I have seen the logs from the plaza. I have every iCloud password, every deleted text, and every photo stored on your servers for the last 10 years. I know about the Tahoe Trust, and I know about Piper's Hermes collection. If one word of that fake story hits the press, the entire world will see the digital soul of this family. Prepare for the truth. I put the phone down. For the first time since I stood in the rain outside the plaza, I felt a genuine smile touch my lips. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a man who had finally stopped playing defense. The phone did not just vibrate this time, it practically jumped off the table. The group chat exploded with frantic typing bubbles. "Julian, wait," my mother typed. "Let us talk about this," Arthur added. I ignored them all. I turned to Brooks and Sloan Vance, who was watching from the corner. "Call the lawyers," I said. "It is time to move from threats to consequences." The silence of my penthouse was a fortress, but outside its walls the Maddox family was beginning to cannibalize itself. The moment the money stopped flowing, the thin veneer of their family-first loyalty vanished, replaced by a desperate animalistic hunger. The first to crack was my brother Ethan. He had spent his entire adult life as a high-society ghost living on an allowance I provided, while pretending to be a venture capitalist. Without my funding, his lease on his luxury apartment was terminated, and his car was repossessed within 48 hours. Ethan did not call me to apologize. Instead, he left a screaming voicemail for our parents that he accidentally forwarded to the family group chat. "You idiots," he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. "You had a gold mine, and you blew it because you could not keep your arrogance in check for one night. You ruined my life to feed your own egos at that hotel. If I lose my club membership because of your stupidity, I will never speak to you again." The infighting was exactly what I needed to mask my next move. I met with my lead counsel Sterling Thorne in a private room at a quiet club in Austin. Sterling was a man who understood that the best way to destroy a greedy person was to give them something larger to fight over. Together, we launched the financial trap. We leaked a series of carefully forged legal documents suggesting that my late grandfather had left a massive, undisclosed trust fund, a $20 million legacy that remained untouched. According to the codicil Sterling produced, the funds were to be distributed only if the heirs remained in good standing with one another or by a majority vote of the surviving family members. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. I watched through Sloan Vance's digital monitoring as the Maddox family turned into a pack of wolves. Within 72 hours, Arthur had filed a preliminary injunction to prevent Ethan from claiming a share. Piper, fearing she would be left out, hired her own lawyer to sue her grandparents for emotional distress and mismanagement of ancestral assets. They were no longer a family. They were litigants in a scorched earth war for a fortune that did not exist. But while they fought over the bait, Sloan found something that the financial trap was designed to uncover. She had been tracking a specific recurring discrepancy in the accounts I had funded for my mother's medical treatments. "Julian, you need to see this," Sloan said, her voice unusually somber. She pointed to a flowchart on her monitor that mapped a series of clandestine transfers. "For 10 years, you have been wiring money to Eleanor for her heart specialist and her secret debt consolidation, but that money never stayed in her account for more than an hour." I leaned in, my breath hitching in my throat. "Where did it go?" "It went to a private account in the Cayman Islands, held by a shell company," Sloan explained. "But the beneficial owner of that company is not a doctor. His name is Marcus Vaughn. He is a 55-year-old former tennis instructor who lives in a villa in Marbella, Spain." I stared at the name. Marcus Vaughn. I searched the archives of my own memory, looking for the name, but found nothing. Sloan clicked another button, revealing a cache of intercepted private messages between Eleanor and this man. The messages were not about medicine. They were filled with affection, planning, and cold, calculated theft. My mother had been in a secret relationship with this man for a decade. Every emergency heart scare, every urgent medical bill she sent to me was a lie. She was not sick. She was not in debt. She was systematically siphoning my wealth to build a life for herself and her lover in Europe. The most devastating part was a message sent only 6 months ago. Eleanor had written to Marcus, "Julian is so easy to manipulate. He thinks he is protecting my heart, but he's just building our retirement. I will keep him on the hook until we have enough to disappear for good. Arthur suspects nothing. He is too busy playing the grand patriarch with Julian's money to notice where the overflow goes." I felt a coldness spread through my veins that no Manhattan winter could match. I realized then that my father Arthur was not the mastermind I had feared. He was a pathetic, arrogant puppet. He had spent years puffing out his chest thinking he was the king of the Maddox castle while his wife was quietly dismantling the walls and handing the bricks to another man. The betrayal was total. It was not just about the $842,000. It was about every night I had stayed up worrying about her health. It was about the fear I felt when she told me her heart was failing. I had loved a ghost. I had sacrificed my own peace to save a woman who viewed my love as a commodity to be traded for a villa in Spain. I stood up and walked to the window. The Austin skyline was blurred by a sudden violent downpour. I realized that I was the only person in the Maddox family who had ever acted out of genuine love, and that was exactly why they had chosen me as their victim. They thought my heart was my weakness. "Sloan," I whispered, my voice devoid of emotion, "stop the bait. We do not need the fake trust fund anymore. We have the criminal evidence of embezzlement and fraud. What's the next move, Julian? She asked. We go to the one person who will be more destroyed by this than I am, I replied. We're going to show Arthur exactly who he has been sharing a bed with for 50 years. If they want to tear each other apart, I am going to give them the teeth to do it. I looked at the phone on my desk. I had one more message to send, and this one would be the final blow. The Denver County Courthouse was a fortress of limestone and cold, impartial judgment. The Denver County Courthouse was a fortress of limestone and cold, impartial judgment. Jurisdiction had been established through interstate wire fraud and the shell company's registration trail. As I walked through the heavy oak doors, the air inside felt sterile, stripped of the humid desperation that had followed the Maddox family from New York to Texas. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my back straight, my eyes fixed on the seal of the court. Across the aisle, my family sat in a row, a crumbling dynasty of silk and lies. Arthur looked aged, his face sallow and his shoulders hunched. Eleanor sat beside him, her jaw set in a mask of defiance, though her fingers trembled as she clutched her designer handbag. They still believed this was about the $20 million trust fund. They still thought they were here to claim a prize. My lead counsel, Sterling Thorne, rose with a deliberate, haunting slowness. He did not lead with a demand for the $842,000 I had lost. He did not talk about the Rolex or the Cartier bracelet. Instead, he addressed the judge with a voice like rolling thunder. Your Honor, my client is not here to seeking a refund. He is here to seeking the truth. We submit into evidence Exhibit D, a digital recording recovered from a private cloud server legally accessed through an administrative override held by my client, who had set up and maintained those devices and cloud accounts as the primary administrator for over a decade. The courtroom fell silent as the speakers crackled to life. It was a recording from only 3 months ago. My mother's voice, devoid of the warmth she used when asking me for money, filled the room. Julian is so easy to manipulate. Eleanor's voice echoed cold and clinical. He thinks he is protecting my heart, but he is just building our retirement in Marbella. I will keep him on the hook until we have enough to disappear for good. Arthur suspects nothing. He is too busy playing the grand patriarch with Julian's money to notice where the overflow goes. We just have to squeeze him dry until he has nothing left to give. The silence that followed was more deafening than the recording. I watched my father. For 50 years, he had believed he was the master of his domain. In 10 seconds, he watched his entire reality dissolve. He did not look at me. He turned his head slowly to look at Eleanor, and for the first time in my life, I saw a man realize he had spent his life sharing a bed with a predator. The legal dominoes fell with a terrifying speed. Because the funds had been obtained through documented medical fraud and systematic embezzlement, the judge's ruling was absolute. She ordered the immediate freezing of all Maddox accounts. The Lake Tahoe estate, purchased with the $250,000 I had loaned my father, was placed into immediate receivership for foreclosure. The fallout did not stop there. Piper, whose role in the financial manipulation and the hotel exclusion had been documented by Sloan Vance, was notified by her university that her conduct violated their ethical charter. She was expelled in the weeks that followed once the court filings became public, her self-made reputation shattered by the public record of her greed. The Maddox family was not just broke, they were a social leper colony. A week later, I drove to a quiet, windswept cemetery on the outskirts of Austin. I found the modest headstone of my grandfather, the only man who had ever taught me the value of a hard day's work. I sat on the grass and pulled a faded handwritten letter from my pocket, the last thing he had given me before he passed. I had not been able to look at it for years, but today the words were my salvation. Julian. The letter read his firm script, steady on the page. A man's worth is not measured by the balance in his bank account, but by the discernment of his spirit. The greatest asset you will ever own does not sit in a vault. It sits in the knowledge of who is truly worthy of your generosity. Do not let your kindness become a cage. Give to those who build, not to those who only know how to consume. I folded the letter and tucked it back into my coat. I had spent years trying to buy the love of people who only saw me as a transaction. I had mistaken sacrifice for duty, but as I stood up, I felt a weight lift from my soul that I had been carrying since I was a child. I returned to my office and signed the final papers with sterling thorn. I did not keep the money recovered from the sale of the Tahoe house or the clawed-back transfers. Instead, I directed every cent to the establishment of a new nonprofit organization. I named it the Self-Made Fund. It was designed to provide full-ride scholarships and business grants for orphans and foster children, young people who had no family to support them, no safety net to catch them, and no one to sign their checks. I walked out of the lawyer's office and onto the balcony of my penthouse. The Austin sun was a brilliant blinding gold stretching across the horizon and warming the glass of the city. I thought back to the night at the plaza, the cold autumn rain of New York, and the amber light of a ballroom where I was called a beggar. I realized then that the manager at the hotel was right, though not in the way he intended. I had walked into that hotel a beggar begging for the approval of people who did not deserve me. I had walked out of that courtroom a king. I took a deep breath of the warm Texas air and smiled. The party was finally truly over, and for the first time in my life, I was the one who owned the light. What are your thoughts on Julian's journey? Please share your feelings in the comments to help me improve and follow for more powerful, meaningful stories. Knowing someone is listening makes all the difference. Thank you for your support and for being part of this community.